Awareness. Well, so I'm left with a question. What are my options? What can I do? Dr. Sands said, Dave, you're an online kind of guy. You might like to join this group. This is the group that Gilles Friedman, who he knew through Tom Ferguson, had started. And it turns out they have a great kidney cancer community. And he literally wrote on a piece of paper, like a prescription slip. I say, I'm a marketing guy. My doctor prescribed Alivecor, which is now smartpatients.com. I am, as I said, I'm not woo-woo la-la. I'm a scientific thinker. Consider what I learned from my patient peers within 2 hours of posting my first message there. All right? Now, mind you, I had a hunger for the best information that might save my life, because my impending death was vivid. And I knew even if it was 1 in a million, even if I was the first one to survive, I was open to that option. First of all, well, first thing they said was, welcome to the club that nobody wants to be in. Stage 4 kidney cancer, right? Another great one, by the way, I want to give a big hat tip to Inspire.com, which is John Novak of Inspire is up here. A college friend of mine, a woman named Janet Freeman Daly, when she discovered that her lung cancer, they were out of options at Virginia Mason in Seattle, she went to ACOR because a mutual friend from college told her about this. She read my book and she went to ACOR. They didn't have lung cancer. I told her about Inspire, and there, although she's in Seattle, she found out about a newly discovered mutation, and the community on Inspire told her about a new trial going on in Denver. She took it back to her doctors at Virginia Mason in Seattle. They said, woohoo, basically. And after a couple of years, she's now NED, the sacred no evidence of disease. She has been to the White House as part of the Precision Medicine Initiative. This stuff works. When information exists that doesn't flow to the point of need, medicine falls short of its potential. All right, now you, as professional stewards of information, I say, have a sacred responsibility to see to it that the stuff in your hands gets out to as many people as may be dying for the lack of it. Anyway, they said this is an uncommon disease. Find a hospital that does a lot of cases. There's no cure, but this stuff called high-dose interleukin-2 sometimes works. It usually doesn't work, the patients said. Right? But when it does, about half the time it's permanent. The side effects will sometimes kill you. In my case, my blood pressure at one point dropped to 50/30 because I got what they call CLS, capillary leak syndrome. This is a potent immune system treatment. It caused, for me, the walls of the capillaries to open up, all the fluid ran out. I had legs like water balloons, no blood pressure. They said, the side effects are severe. That's why you have to find a specialist hospital, because they know how to cope with the side effects, which is exactly what they did. They spotted it, unplugged me. There was the end of my treatment, but in my case, I'd had enough. They said, don't let them give you anything else first, and here are 4 doctors in your area, the Boston area, who do it. One of them was at my hospital, David McDermott at Beth Israel Deaconess. Ladies and gentlemen, I assert that to the patient, this is valuable information, and to this day, 7 years later, this information does not exist in the literature. This is not an indictment of the literature. My point is that there is additional valid information beyond the literature. Beyond the literature, that sounds like a good name for an article or something, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, so, long story short, I was diagnosed in January. My treatment ended in July. I've had nothing since. I'm all better. And in fact, thank you. I'm glad. And it's funny because my only real noticeable symptom has been that I've slowly been losing weight. The hospital actually sent me a diet to stop the cancer-induced weight loss. It was how to increase your caloric intake. It said put real whipped cream on all desserts. It did. It really said that. And a year later, I knew the party was over when Dr. Sands wrote to me and said, you have not expired, but your need to lose weight has. Oh, no, your need to gain weight has. It's time to start. Well, and then a few years later, he Anyway, long story short, surgery and interleukin work. The amazing thing, this was interleukin, high-dose interleukin-2. Apparently there are 23 different interleukins. Some are helpful, some are evil. This one, it's an immune system treatment. It's all through the body. And they didn't have to cut my lungs open to get rid of those tumors. You know, they cut me open to get the kidney out, thank heaven. But that was, and when my leg eventually broke of a pathological fracture, but other than that, I had no surgery. And then, so I confess, all right, I am a Vietnam War, Nixon era protest hippie freak, all right? And I am attuned to how you accomplish social change. So to me, you know, I know the radicals standing outside the fortress walls with the torches and pitchforks and everything don't generally get a lot done. I'm listening for changes in the establishment. So when the British Medical Journal asked me, I didn't apply to them, they asked me to write up this story because they thought it needed to be in the literature. I thought, whoa, that's awesome. And I didn't just want to tell my story from the patient's perspective. I knew other clinicians would be reading this. So I asked my oncologist, what would you want other physicians to know about my case? And here's what he said. He said, you were really sick. I don't know if you could have tolerated enough medicine if you hadn't been so well prepared. Now, I said all that information is not in the literature 7 years later. He was talking about side effects. All right? Now, me being an engaged patient, when I found out the side effects might kill me, one approach is to say, okay, put on the crash helmet and hope. I said, okay, where's my side effects boot camp? How do I prepare? They had no information. So I looked in the literature, went to PubMed, guided by my patient community. There's nothing. Then I had a brainstorm. I asked the patient community, you guys who've done it, how did you survive it? And I got 17 first-hand stories, which he says helped save my life. Notice I'm not asserting this, I'm quoting my freaking oncologist, okay? Now here's a question for you. How can it be that the most relevant and useful and up-to-the-minute information can possibly exist outside the peer-reviewed literature where we are taught to look as scientific thinkers, as trained, educated people? And it turns out that Ferguson, at his death, was working on a manifesto funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to look at, to report on the ePatient movement. And on the ePatients.net website, you can find this. It's a black icon here. It's a 122-page white paper. My wife's the veterinarian, says, white paper, it's got a black cover. Why is it called a white paper? Well, that's common sense as opposed to business. Anyway, one of the things, he was interviewing authorities in medicine to gather information so that, again, this didn't seem counter-establishment. Don Lindbergh was the director of the National Library of Medicine 10 years ago, retired recently. He said that when he was in medical school, he was taught that a good doctor would go home and read 2 journal articles every night to keep up on things. He said, if I did that today, after 1 year, I'd be 400 years behind. There's too much stuff being published for anyone to know everything. That number, according to the Institute of Medicine 2 years ago, was up to 1,100. The math is simple, 2,200 articles published every day. If you read 2, you'll fall behind by 1,100 to 1. The toughest intellectual audience I've ever spoken to was in Jerusalem. My best friend who died a couple years ago was an Israeli intellectual. He taught me a lot about that culture. I knew when I went to talk to them that it's a big deal in that culture to have a well-developed, well-trained, careful, sharp mind. And they were going mad during this day because it was a meeting of Israeli doctors and lawyers at the Israel Internet Society debating the ethics of using the internet in medicine. And guess who was the last thing between them and dinner? Me, the specimen. And what I said was, anyone whose sense of self-worth depends on knowing everything is in big trouble these days. It's no insult if a less trained person has seen a paper that you haven't. But there still is no substitute for the trained mind. with the years of clinical experience to put the new information in perspective. It's a really important thing, because to some physicians, I had one doctor tell me after a talk, I was taught that my value is to know things that patients don't know. If a patient knows something that I don't, then who am I? Those were his words. You know, and I can understand that, but this is culture change. It's exactly similar to, there was a husband in my town in Minnesota who reacted to, where I grew up, who reacted to feminism by saying, I'm doing everything I can to make a good living for you. Isn't that enough? You know, it's culture change. Well, then there's the lethal lag time, dissemination delay, 2 to 5 years. E-patients in a good patient community, they don't just know about papers that have been written and aren't in press and haven't been published yet. They know studies that are going on that are years from ever being published. That's what saved Janet Freeman Daly. You know, in fact, I knew a woman, a member of our society, who was a metastatic breast cancer patient. They'd run out of treatments. Because she belonged to 4 e-patient communities, she found a researcher working on an obscure marker that was years away from ever being a clinical trial. She didn't go rogue, she brought it to her oncologist, the same way Janet did, and said, what do you think? And they tried it, and she matched, and they concocted an N of 1 thing. Patient-defined value. What she was happy about was that she got to live another 18 months watching her grandchildren grow up. And they were 18 months older, knowing her for 18 months more before she passed. If you haven't heard about this, it's amazing. I wish somebody would repeat this. This is a 2001 paper from the Institute of Medicine documenting that and we're talking here not about obscure things, but like diabetic foot care, cholesterol, beta blockers, flu vaccines. What it said was, on average, it takes 17 years for half of physicians to adopt new, well-documented practices. Okay, now this is, if you want to look this up, the author's name is Ballas, B-A-L-A-S, or you can write to me, because all my contact information is on the slide. And anyway, the point here being, it's a mistake to think, I mean, I'll tell you, I thought that when I was diagnosed, everybody in the hospital would drop what they were doing and go find out the latest stuff about kidney cancer. Oh, you know what? My hospital listens, at least the oncology team listens so well that they now have a booklet of how to deal with side effects for kidney cancer treatments. How's that for awesome, right? That is value being added to the system by listening to patient communities. And Ferguson said these conclusions are no more anti-doctor or anti-medicine than Copernicus and Galileo were anti-astronomer when they said, hey, maybe the Earth isn't the center of the solar system, right? Patients can simply contribute more than in the past. We're in a Microsoft building here, and I'm going to show you a slide I got from Microsoft when they were more active in healthcare a number of years ago. This is the traditional healthcare universe. This is the Copernican shift here. It's all about the facility. The consumers are orbiting around it. Well, the way it is now, increasingly, it's orbiting around the consumer. This is largely mediated, this shift is largely mediated by the consumer's access to information. And when it is your baby or your mother whose life is at stake, or maybe yours, this will all look different. One of my aphorisms is, patient is not a third person word. All right? When it's you, it all looks different. Who was it? Somebody here, you don't have to raise your hand for privacy, but somebody told me chatting outside earlier, boy, it sure got different when I was the patient, the one with the real problem. So your time will come. So the dynamic here is that because of the web, we can connect with each other. Now this is a nice, cute, generic social media diagram. Ooh, kumbaya, everybody's all connected, right? But I had an epiphany after using this about 100 times. I realized information is precisely analogous to a nutrient in healthcare. It enables a more robust response where it's present, and these social media connections are precisely analogous to capillaries in the body. They are the mechanism, the pathway by which information nutrients can travel without centralized control, because capillaries are not centrally controlled, to a new place. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over this more detailed discussion here, because my opening squirrel sidetrack took us off track. So I was going to be a chemical engineering major down the road here until I discovered the hippie life, and turns out that in chemical engineering it really makes a difference if you go to class. But one of the last books I remember before I transferred was Fundamentals of Heat and Mass Transfer. It wasn't this book, but this is engineering. How do you make things happen? How do you make heat get to where it's needed? How do you move mass around on a production line? I want to ping your IT brain to ask, how about some fundamentals of information transfer? How does information get moved? And I'll point out liquidity transforms what's possible. Here's something that's not liquid, coal on a train, right? And on the right, there's a stream running through a forest. That's liquid, baby. Now on the coal train, moving it takes effort. It's slow and predictable, right? And arrivals that have no explanation are suspicious. Where the heck did this come from? That's exactly the opposite of when you have data liquidity, okay? Controlling the flow takes effort. If you've ever tried to stop a social media disaster, no, really, controlling the flow takes effort. It's fast and unpredictable, and the tracks, so to speak, are everywhere and free. It radically alters, and this is the shift of information flow changing from a closed system to an open network. And it makes new things possible. You can operate both ways, but my appeal to you as health IT professionals, current or in school, my appeal to you is realize that the world is like the way it is on the right, a network of networks, liquid. Don't be thinking that the world is the way it used to be on the left, where information was delivered through a one-way pipeline. In my closing minutes, I want to mention two books that, depending on your personal interest, I strongly, strongly recommend. This one, The Digital Doctor by Bob Wachter. Yes, it rhymed. The Digital Doctor by Robert Wachter. I am on my third time through now listening to this book during my workouts and my runs. Third time through. I told a class at Hopkins last week, study this like scripture if you want to understand. My subtitle for this is how we got into this mess of health IT and what to do next. It is packed, packed, packed with carefully measured sentences and arguments and so on. He devotes a separate section of the book to 5 different views of how a 39-fold overdose of an antibiotic was delivered to a teenager in his hospital. And it's really carefully reasoned, and you come away thinking, I understand how complicated this is. Now, I say that as somebody who made a career for a couple of years about just bitching about the situation. But this, I understand it better. The other one, at the opposite end of the scale, Wachter talks about where we are now and how we got here, is Eric Topol. Now, it's a cardiologist who's proposing the end of the stethoscope in medicine, which is a pretty radical idea. But when you think about it, now mind you, I'm not saying there was a discussion on Facebook the other day, somebody saying, my doctor's nodding his head, not worth the money. Well, so when you're on the leading edge, you see some things that are way out there. For instance, there's a website called The Medical Futurist. They posted something over the weekend on Facebook about a wristband now that will measure a diabetic's glucose and inject insulin, and said, it's here. And the patient community came down and said, BS, it's not here, it's a maybe someday, and besides, how much insulin can you fit in this thing, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da, right? But then there's also what I call the arriving future. The arriving future. And when something shows up for the first time, it's expensive, and the market hasn't shaken out yet. Well, so the V-scan, Topol says you listen to a stethoscope to get this analog signal of sounds that your mind can translate into a picture of what's happening in the heart. The V-scan, you put a wand on the patient's chest and you get a picture. of what's happening. Now, I'm not saying it's better. I'm saying it's something that's amazingly newly possible. And so this is his book, The Patient Will See You Now, which interestingly is also, did you know you cannot copyright the name of a book? Anybody can go out and write another book with the same title. 5, 6 years ago, Dr. Sands gave me a book titled The Patient Will See You Now, right? Interesting stuff. Well, the future of medicine is in your hands. I went to a non-medical conference a couple years ago on aviation safety. Well, actually, the subject was HRO, High Reliability Organizations, which is organizations that deal with situations where disaster would be entirely understandable. The classic example is landing a fighter jet on an aircraft carrier in bucking seas. How the heck do they do that? Especially considering that most of the people doing the work on the deck have only a few years of experience. Most of the middle managers, AKA officers, have maybe 10 or 15 years of experience and so on. Well, there's this thing called situational awareness, SA, that is vitally important. And in medicine, there have been real changes in who can get at SA data. Hugo Campos wants his ICD data. He has a very badly shaped heart. I'll see if I can say this correctly. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Did I do that correctly? Good. There you go. It took me years. Well, so he's got a device wired into his heart muscle, an ICD, implanted cardioverter and defibrillator. It keeps an eye on the electrical activity. If things are getting wonky, it'll try to stabilize it, and if necessary, it will shock the heart from inside his chest as if somebody got the paddles. It hurts like hell, but he doesn't die. He's thinking, great, I'm glad for this, but you know what? I'd really like to have a dashboard on my phone so I could see what's going on in the heart. So he asks Medtronic, the maker, and Medtronic says, no, you're not our customer. True story. Your doctor is our customer. His doctor doesn't want to give him the data. So the doctor every day gets a printout on the iPad of everything that happened to all their patients the day before. Hugo gets a printout every 6 months of what happened, like last April 12th, you almost died, and so on. And Hugo feels disempowered to take action because he doesn't have situational awareness. Well, along comes this, which now looks like this. Anyway, how many people know what this is? I know there are some of you here. Yes, my doctor does and several others. This is a smartphone EKG called the Alivecor. It used to be $400. It's now $99 on Amazon. I got one for show and tell. I don't need it. But it will, the big problem with an arrhythmia is it often doesn't happen in the doctor's office. Well, now you have one at home, you go like this, and it says, you're having AFib. No, you're having VTAC, you're in big trouble. Right there, and it's FDA approved. Right? Now notice, doctors can pre-order. In the United States, when it was initially approved, they said, you need a prescription from your doctor, because they wouldn't want people to hurt themselves on the spiky things, you know? But now anybody can buy one. Well, Hugo got one, and he's smiling now. A few months after he got one, he woke up at 6 in the morning with a bad arrhythmia. He said, I think this feels like AFib, which is not good, but it's not a disaster. He slapped the Alivecor on his bare chest and found out it was ventricular tachycardia, and he knew if that didn't stop soon, he was in big trouble. See how he was empowered to act by data. Okay? This thing will listen for 30 seconds and then say, looks good, or you want me to send it to your doctor. Right? In fact, Henry Feldman, one of the super geek people at Beth Israel Deaconess, mentions on Facebook how when somebody comes into the ER, they will use this to send a tape, an EKG tape, up to the floor before the patient gets there. Isn't that interesting? Or they'll have the EMTs do it. Well, the next day happened to be a visit for Medtronic, and son of a gun, what did the Medtronic device say? Non-sustained VTAC episode at 6 o'clock in the morning. Power in the patient's hand. And I'll just skip through the rest. Diabetes. Have you heard of the do-it-yourself pancreas system? This is scary to many doctors. I was visiting professor at Mayo a year ago, and I mentioned this during my lunch lecture to some residents. the look of horror on their faces. All right, so there is a We Are Not Waiting movement in the diabetes movement. You can look up that hashtag, and they have created a do-it-yourself pancreas system by hacking into this woman Dana's continuous glucose monitor and her digital insulin pump. They get the data on her carbs on board and everything else. Her fiance, now her husband, wrote an iPhone app, 40 or 50 lines of code, that generates a different prediction on what her future is going to look like, and therefore gives her different advice than the FDA-approved devices she's got wired into her. She blogged, they live blogged, and what you can see here is as the blue and red lines got better over the course of a year of fiddling with the algorithm, she became a better controlled diabetic. And there's nothing anybody can do to stop it. Well, what did they do? They donated the software to open source, openaps.org, and at the Precision Medicine workshop at the White House a couple weeks ago, Dana tweeted, "When my blood glucose is no longer the first thing I think about when waking up," and that's how stable she was through the night. Through the night. So, let's see. I need to stop, don't I? All right, good. Well, so, this is it. This is my Twitter avatar, medical records spigot, and I'll just say I'm all in favor of fire. I'm sure you all know what fire is. In fact, what I want is a fire hose, right? Now, Dr. Sands disagrees. He said, what are you going to do with this data and so on? I say, just give it to us and we'll worry about that. We perform better anyway. So I'm going to skip through. This is what happened, by the way, with my diabetes thing. I found out I was pre-diabetic. I bought a fitness wristband and a heart band, and over the holidays a year ago, my weight went up. The lesson being that information alone doesn't change behavior. But then I got into a diabetes prevention class, and I had strong spousal support, and here's what happened. I lost 30 pounds so fast, my oncologist said, get back in here for a CAT scan. I achieved behavior change. You know, I went to, my daughter's a marathon runner, I went to LLB and to get a skinnier windbreaker. I went from extra large to medium, we freaking choo-hoo, right? Like, you know, this guy's wider, I'm not. Right, in fact, here's the whole picture. I've lost another 8 pounds in the last several months. I am proudly wearing a jacket from the walking gallery of healthcare. This woman, Regina Holiday, with the other Regina Benjamin, then Surgeon General. You know, my point here is, you know, a movement's becoming a social revolution when artists and musicians show up. And anyway, here's me the night of that physical. Just before, this is a guy who was dying of kidney cancer. 10 months later at the office Halloween party, my treatment had ended, and I was very glad that somebody snapped this picture of me grinning at the ghoul, because that's pretty much how I felt about life. I'd pictured my mother's face at my funeral, and instead in 2009, I was laughing with her on the day I did get to walk my daughter down the aisle. And what a pleasure that was. I know. I agree. And she's a digital punk, so you know she does lots of things on Snapfish. Well, at Christmas 2000, Snapfish, not Snapchat. I didn't say Snapchat. Get your mind out of the gutter. Jeez. Or do you not know about Snapfish? I should. So what does it mean if your doctor knows Snapchat but not Snapfish? Anyway, she gave me the world's worst jigsaw puzzle for a Christmas present. Turns out she'd made a jigsaw puzzle out of an ultrasound. And it was her way of letting me know that I was about to become a grandfather. And I am really happy to be alive. Some people think that patient empowerment and engagement disrespects medicine. Medicine saves my life. My point is that when information doesn't flow, the best trained clinicians in the world and the most motivated patients in the world cannot perform to the top of their potential. So please, 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 and by the way, here's a question for you. If you think patients can't do anything, when does autonomy start becoming appropriate? That's my granddaughter. She now has passed the age of 2 and she has opinions. No pop-pop's car, mom's car, things like that, right? So, there you go, that's it. Thanks, let's have drinks. Yeah, and by the way, notice,
Why don't we just do, anybody, maybe two questions, and then we'll be done.
well, whatever you want, you know, go have drinks, ask questions, be empowered.
I know we're running over.
There's one.
Go ahead. Can you stand up?
Sure, just curious your thoughts about how do you filter out the bad data and your self-advocate? Because there are a lot of
There are stupid people.